Welcome, everybody. I see many friends and many people who I meet at conferences. Welcome, Charles. This is going to be a very heated discussion. And a few minutes ago, I think the hotel was going to contribute to the heat because the lights just went off. Thank God it's back. So warm welcome to everybody here. I don't need to introduce General Flynn, but still the process demands that I do. So General Charles A. Flynn assumed command of the U.S. Army's largest service component command, U.S. Army Pacific, on 4th June 2021, about a year ago. The U.S. Army Pacific is headquartered at Fort Chapter, Hawaii, with portions of the command forward deployed and based through the Indo-Pacific. I've been to your command, by the way. It's a very fine piece of geography there. Earlier, General Flynn served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Army Operations, Plans and Training at the Pentagon. General Flynn has served in a variety of command, staff, and leadership positions, from platoon leader to division commander. He's highly educated. He's a distinguished military graduate from the University of Rhode Island with a BS in Business Management. I was going to ask you about that. How did you get into business management? Maybe you could tell us that. He holds 2 master's degrees, one in national security and strategic studies from the United States Naval War College at Newport, RI, and one in joint campaign planning and strategy from the National Defense University. Quite exhausted just reading the educational qualifications. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, General Flynn. You want to talk about the land aspects around the Indo-Pacific, and we will then get to the questions. So over to you.
Thank you, Gautam. I appreciate the invitation. I'm thankful to spend some time with you this afternoon, answer any questions that you might have, give you at least my perspective on a few things. I think I'd start by just saying, it's nice to be back in India. I was here last in 2017. This is my 3rd time in the command. I have nearly a decade of time in the region. I was a major general and a 2-star commander in the 25th Division from 2014 to 16, and then I was the deputy commander as a 2-star of the command that I'm in right now from 2016 to 2018. And then as Gautam mentioned, I went to the Pentagon and was the Army Operations Officer for 3 years, and then honored to be able to come back in 2021, about just a year ago, and take command of this enormously complex but invaluable theater army that I get the opportunity to command. And it's at a time that I would express it as this is the most consequential theater at a most consequential time in history. I'll sort of start by saying, so why am I here, and why is it important that the Army of the Pacific Commander is here in India? Well, first of all, as the largest democracy in the world, it's important that our armies share our experiences and share our training together because of what we represent. And then secondly, even though there is a lot going on globally, and there's this terrible situation in Europe, I would express to all of you that the geostrategic weight of the century remains here in the Indo-Pacific, in this region, and that India, geopolitically, geographically, geostrategically, sits at the crossroads. It sits at the crossroads of Eurasia, of Central Asia, of South Asia, of Southeast Asia, of Northeast Asia, of the Asian continent, and that the gravity of the situation, it's important that I'm here to talk and share our principles and our ideals and our efforts as land power and as armies in the region. And I've had a great couple of days with the Army leadership, the Air Force leadership, over the National Security Council with you all here today. And then tomorrow I'm going to go out and visit the Eastern Theater Command. So it's nice to be back in India. It's wonderful to see Delhi, see the country, see the people, partake in the wonderful food that's here. So that, as an opening, thank you again for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
So you when you met our army chiefs, you said the reports came up saying that you discussed mutual interests, supporting allies and partners. What are these mutual interests? And do they converge mutually? Or is it that we will fight till the last Ukrainian kind of mutualism?
Well, so I'll start by saying, we have had a long period of an exercise that we in the Army share with them called exercise Yud Abiyas. And I've said it so many times today, I get tangled up on it. But so I think that, for the last couple of years, it's been a challenge across the region because the separation in all of our work due to the pandemic. And so I think, reconnecting and making sure that exercise and the training and the rehearsing and the sharing of insights and lessons and capabilities and organizational adjustments, given the complexities of the threats that we're all faced with today, is important. And so the discussion with the Army leadership and the Air Force leadership to make sure that we can scale the exercise the right way, bring challenging scenarios to it, bring new capabilities, new organizational designs, because all of us are working to stay ahead of the threats that are emerging, the threats that we had, I would say, sort of saw coming, but then there's new ones that are developing every day. And so in order to share those insights and experiences, you have to do that with real soldiers, real commanders, real units in real time. And I think that that is a lot of what General Pandey and General Raju and myself have been talking about for the last couple of days. And if I can, we, in April of this year, just a couple months ago, we had our Indian U.S. Army Land Forces talks in Hawaii, and a lot of that discussion came from that exchange. And so we're just advancing the conversation and advancing some of the ideas of what we want to weave together in the training between our armies.
So, General Flynn, you just mentioned, I'll just open this. It is such an exciting opportunity. I don't want to let it go. Maybe I'm abusing my powers as the moderator. I'll just open it after this last question. You just mentioned values and democracy. What we, from the Indian point of view, what we see is that, particularly in Europe recently, but earlier as well, is that the West expects India to follow its values while the West pursues its interests. And another perception here is that the US as a dependable ally or a partner is becoming less and less dependable and less. For instance, Ukraine is going on. Taiwan could be next. We don't know how the US is going to behave in that. Is it just arms sales? Is it just moral strength? And so, because this is at the 35,000 at the leadership level, you're the person with the feet on the ground. You're the ground zero person. You're the person who executes. What is your perception of this?
So I think that that there's a lot of challenges today that surround protection of our people, protection of our national sovereignty, protection of the resources that our people need, namely things like fresh water, food, natural resources, minerals to run factories, so that our people can maintain the economy and a stable way of life. And I think that land forces, armies in this region, even though many look at a map and they see a lot of water and they see a lot of air and they see the names of two oceans, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, I'm one to remind many that people have this unique tendency to live on land. And on land is where decisions are made, and generally speaking, wealth resides. And armies in this region play a central and crucial role on protection of national sovereignty. And so, even the U.S. motto for the Army, "This will defend," is about defending our country. And I believe that that probably rings true here as well. I'm sure it does. And so I think that the work that we do together as land power in this region, I think the centrality of armies in this region, and I think that the land forces, and I've stated this publicly many times, and I'll continue to state it, I believe, it's been my experience, and as I watch and pay attention to what's actually happening in the region, as I have since 2014 when I came back to the region for my second assignment. Now I'm on my third assignment. I believe that land power and armies are the security architecture that bind the region together. And I think that there's a great counterweight that armies working together to strengthen our relationships, to rehearse, to share their experiences, to share educational experiences, to share training experiences, to share lessons and insights. I believe that the strength of that and the counterweight to destabilizing activities or corrosive and corruptive activities and behaviors, I think the great counterweight to that is through land power and through armies working together to provide a buttress or provide a way of protecting the people and protecting the countries and protecting the national sovereignty of countries. And that's why I think that land power plays a central role. And I'm here to remind people that while I will admit, and I am part of a joint command, and that joint command has formidable air and naval power. It also has cyber and space capabilities in those domains. But I do not want anyone to forget the value of land power across Asia, across Southeast Asia, and across these continents, and across the countries here. And so as the commander of U.S. Army Pacific, my view is that the closer that we can form our relationships and bind our efforts together, then the more stable, the more secure, the more free and open the region will remain.
Thank you. So you haven't answered my question, and I'm not going to push it since you're wearing the uniform. I open it out. Anybody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand, identify yourself, and ask the question.
Little bit more clarity on what you mean by land power and what lessons can we draw from the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So I'll just go through that very briefly. How do you analyze the Russia-Ukraine conflict in terms of land warfare from a very military perspective? And number two, we've seen Russian tanks have been unable or, have not performed as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict goes. So how do you see the notion of land warfare changing? Do you see armies changing? And when you talk about land warfare in the Indo-Pacific, what exactly does that mean or constitute?
Well, I guess what I would say is that despite any wishful thinking from a wide range of folks, whether they be academia or think tanks or political or military for that matter, what's happened in Europe is a stark reminder that war is unpredictable, it's long, it's violent, and it's human. And so I think it's too early to say that we're learning lessons from what's happening. I think we're observing. I think we're reflecting. I think we're processing. But I think it's too soon to say, well, we've learned this lesson. I do think that it's important for us to continue to focus on what we're seeing and the adaptations that are being made by capabilities, by technology. I also think while that gets a lot of attention, I also think the other aspect that we need to probably pay more attention to is organizational constructs at echelon, like what happens at the tactical level, what happens at the operational level, what happens at the strategic level, how do you connect the political to the tactical military plan versus the strategy. And so I think that all of that is playing out, and we should all be paying attention to it. I think I'm not going to sit here and tell you what I think the Chinese are learning about what they're seeing, but I do think that as a professional military, it would be foolish of us to not believe that they're going to learn from what they're observing, and that they're going to, I would imagine they would, as all of us will, they'll then take some of those insights and then put that into organizational designs, material solutions, tactics, techniques, procedures, land, naval and air operations or joint operations. So I think it's still too early to say definitively this or that. I just think it's really important that we're just laser focused on what is actually happening and then see how those things translate into what they're doing day to day or what they begin to rehearse on and train on.
I'm going to come to you in a minute, but I just can't help myself. Your focus seems to be on land, and after land on naval and air, while I think the texture of war has now changed to cyber, to narratives, to very fine drones, etc. Do you still want to concentrate on
why do you believe that?
I think, look, okay, Somebody mentioned Russia here. The Russian tanks are not doing as well, etc., etc. We are only listening to the Western media. Russia has been cancelled as a nation. We don't know what's going on inside. Maybe they are winning. This is not to say what Russia is doing is right or wrong, but we don't know what's going on. So I think the war that's happening in Ukraine and Russia is definitely skewed towards the West in terms of the information part. On ground, what's happening, we have to take the information for granted. So I think information has become part of war.
Well, I don't doubt that information's become part of war, but I guess the way I'm a land guy. I'm supposed to talk. I'm talking about land, and I'm talking about the centrality of land because, again, people live on land. Decisions are made on land. I don't know of a war that's been won in cyberspace or space. I don't know of one. So until I see one, then I'll become a believer. But in the meantime, sovereignty, national sovereignty, while there is some certainly at sea in the littorals, and there are resources there, and there is airspace and the electromagnetic spectrum over the top of countries that is owned by the countries. At the end of the day, when your national sovereignty is violated, people, soldiers, they either have to make a decision to go return that or not. That is a political decision. But at the end of the day, the force to do that exists on land.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am. I'll just come to you.
Tara Kartha, I'm a distinguished fellow with the IPCS. Two very quick questions. One is, given what you said about India being, on the crossroads of the Asia Pacific, so on and so forth, which is a given when you look at the map. Do you see this country wanting to emerge as a logistics hub? That's one. Second is that I am completely with you on the land forces thing because our threats are from the land. Right now what we're facing is totally a land-based threat and it's immediate. But in addition to that is what you may have seen recently, the Al-Qaeda threat, which was a very, very nasty one, which we saw yesterday. That threat could come pretty much anywhere, again on land. But what I find is that in US policy documents, the emphasis on terrorism has steadily gone down, whereas for us, it's a very huge threat. So am I wrong in thinking that, or do you still, as a land forces expert, see terrorism as a consequential threat?
Can you, the emphasis on what? I didn't pick up. Terrorism. Let me address I don't know if, it's not my place to talk about whether India sees themselves as a logistics hub. I do think geographically, there's enormous opportunity that exists because of the location. And I think, again, the training that we do together with the Army and the Air Force and Abhyas and the exchange that we do between that exercise, in this particular case, the training center that we're building in Alaska, and the work that we're doing at high altitude and mountainous, extreme cold weather environments is important for us. And we're going to learn a lot from that. We're going to learn things like, how to sustain forces at altitude, which, by the way, the Indian Army is very, very skilled at, and we need help with that. But I also think that there are advanced capabilities that we can provide. For example, the last couple of years, we've brought some extreme cold weather gear, very light, that was individual sets, but also sort of small unit sets that have advanced technologies to them. So again, I think these are things that are helpful for us to share. On terrorist threats, sort of violent extremist groups, We have been criticized, the Army has been criticized, my Army, of not previously not putting in place mechanisms to learn from our past experiences. I would say that in this particular case, after 2 decades of fighting a counterinsurgency, that one of the organizations that we've created is working today in India with your Army, the Security Force Assistance Brigade, of which we've actually built 6 of them in the U.S. Army. One of them, the 5th Security Force Assistance Brigade, is committed out here in the Indo-Pacific. And the advisor teams, some advisor teams are here working with the Indian Army on a wide range of, again, tactics, techniques, procedures. And I think the sharing of that work, but maybe more importantly, ma'am, is the relationships that are created and the generation of younger officers, non-commissioned officers, and warrant officers working together so that, as they matriculate up through the Indian Army and they matriculate up in the U.S. Army, that those relationships deepen and grow over time, and that shared experience and that common bond becomes something that's invaluable, really, to both of our countries. And over time, I believe that that's how we solve a lot of problems, is through those personal relationships that leaders have together from their common bonds of training and exercising together.
Thank you. Just as the discussion is heating up, I'm being told by the big boss right there at that corner that I don't have much time. So I'm going to quickly take short questions, maybe 2 or 3 at a time, and then maybe you could answer them. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gautam. John Flynn, welcome to India. Sir, I am an Army veteran for about 29 years and again a land person. I would hold your opinion about the land forces as correct, because the naval power and the air powers are more projectionist in nature. Where in a short time, a lot of capability can be focused at one point, but you need boots on ground. No war can be won without boots on land. And point in discussion was your Iraq war, where till the time 1st Airborne Division was landed and they could do the pincer movement and they could occupy land on ground, the war could not be culminated. So the land forces are very economical to deploy. There's a high survivability. And also, it gives a lot of permanency and longevity to operations. So
sir, that big boss is looking out. You need to get to the
My question to you, sir, is that we have signed a lot of agreements with the US-based Limoya, Becca, Comcasa, and many other things that we have signed. But our security codes are different. Our equipment are different. We must be practicing certain things in the exercises. But how are you trying to sync these things with our own forces at the backdrop of all these agreements?
Yeah, so I'll go back to Yudh-Abhyas. I mean, I think that exercise gives us an opportunity. If there is, and this is what we've been talking about for the last couple of days, if there is a capability that they're interested in other words, they express to us that, hey, we're interested in this. In fact, in April, we just did a demonstration after the 2+2 dialogue when the MINDEF came through Hawaii on some counter UAS and some other capabilities. Again, if they express to us that they're interested in a capability, then we can, and we say we have that capability, then we can bring it into that exercise and show the capability to the soldiers, to the leaders, to the commanders, to anybody. And then if that's something that they're interested in, then they can either find a way to create that capability here in India, or we can take it into a different path to look at ways to help one another out. And I think that that's really important in exercises like that. And we do it, by the way, across the region. It's not just here. And that interoperability is really important. And by the way, people use the term interoperability like it's, there's three types of interoperability. There's human, there's technical, and there's procedural. The human interoperability is the most important interoperability. It's a precursor to technical and procedural interoperability being advanced with advanced capability. So actually having people together to work together in an exercise and then bring capabilities that bring technical and procedural interoperability, then we're at a different level. Hope that answers.
Thank you. Over to you. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3 questions at one time. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I have to write fast.
Sorry, Jennifer Flynn. Kim Dozier, a CFR fellow visiting here at the Observer Research Foundation. From briefings with former Trump administration officials and also with the 5th SFAB, the Security Force Assistant Brigade, I've heard a lot about what U.S. assistance has been in terms of not just cold weather gear, but they pushed a lot of intelligence down from all sorts of collection platforms to the Indian military. What further assistance can the U.S. Army give, considering you've got 50,000 Chinese troops still facing tens of thousands of Indian troops in Ladakh? How can you make them smarter on the battlefield? And do you think the Indian people are aware of how much assistance the U.S. has already given in the past couple of years?
Would you prefer taking questions one by one? It's up to you. Your question, sir.
You don't want me to address that?
I was wondering whether we could collect, or if you would prefer to do one question at a time, that's good too. Maybe you would prefer to answer.
So just quickly, so we had a land forces talks in April, as I mentioned, and I guess, Kim, I had the benefit of being able to sort of look back at the types of discussion that we were having based on the information that we were both had access to. And so I would just tell you it's very different. And I think that that's important, the sharing of the insights of what's actually happening. And then the other aspect of this is, and you're right, at the request of the Indian Army, there was and I happened to be the operations officer of the Army at the time, so accelerating and working around sometimes the slow and laborious acquisition process to get the extreme cold weather systems here, and then also different types of ammunition for and 777 howitzers and other capabilities that we pursued at the request of the Indian Ministry and the Indian Army, was an example of I think the cooperation that exists today. That is very different because of the situation here. Focused, sense of urgency. I think that's probably how I would characterize it.
So, General Flynn, I'm General Shukla. Till recently, I was Army Commander Artillery. So I just wanted to make one comment and like a quick response. In the age of multi-domain operations, where primarily your skills lie in your ability to fuse space, cyber, in the emerging domains with the traditional domains, is it not retrograde to return to these postulates of land power being the prime metric? I mean, I'm not denying the foundational strength of land power, but in interestingly, I'd like you to confirm this, that the American military is thinking of changing its, race, train, sustain norm, where you are now talking of taking your multi-domain task forces at the inception stage to the joint theaters. So, if that is the direction we have to move, then these debates of land power being primus inter pares or maritime power being primus inter pares is a thing of the past. I don't think we should even very respectfully even talk of it, but I would still love to hear you.
That's a great question. One I do get asked often. So I guess I would frame it this way. There's our future operating concept. By the way, all the services have a future operating concept. So you have agile combat employment by the Air Force. You have expeditionary basing operations by the Marine Corps. You have distributed maritime operations by the Navy. And then you have multi-domain operations from the Army. There's 3 tenets of that future operating concept. The first is calibrating our force posture, so adjustments around the globe based on the threats and based on a prioritization, of which I think it's pretty clear that this theater is the priority. And so we are doing things to adjust or calibrate our force posture across the globe, but with an eye towards prioritizing positional advantage in this theater. The second part, or the second tenet of our multi-domain operations is the employment and organization of multi-domain formations. So one of them being the multi-domain task force. We have a whole host of other ones, theater fires, command. We have an information advantage element. We have the Security Force Assistance Brigade. I could go into other organizations, but the signature organization of our future operating concept is multi-domain task force. I'm going to stay on this for just a minute because I think it's important that often talked about are all of the material solutions and the advanced technologies and the electronic warfare, space, cyber, precision-guided munitions, etc. But oftentimes we field advanced capabilities and we give it to a legacy organization. And that organization has difficulty employing these advanced capabilities. And what I think is unique this time is that we got an experimental organization organized. We talked about it in 18 and we put it out in 19. And it is going to be 2-3 years ahead of the advanced capabilities that we are fielding. And so I think this is a little bit of experience and a little bit of luck that came together. And it's okay. It's good to have some luck sometimes. That organization is years ahead of the advanced capabilities, the material solutions that are going to be coming, the technology that is going to be coming. And what we're learning is all of the things that I just mentioned. The human interoperability, the technical interoperability, the procedural interoperability that has to go with these advanced capabilities through a commander led by a 1-star general with a staff that knows how to then interface with land component, air component, space component, cyber component, maritime component, interagency, multinational, joint. And then the third tenet is convergence. And that convergence is talking about an end-to-end, network-enabled, transport-agnostic, data-centric fabric, right? So that we can converge these advanced capabilities at a time and place of our choosing. All domains. In every layer, the terrestrial layer, the aerial layer, the space layer, in all 5 of the domains, in all 4 directions. And I think that I think that the power of that and enabling those efforts through land power. And I'll say this about land power, that we are all conditions, all weather, all environment. If you're flying something, you actually have to land. You have to come down. If you're at sea, there are things that can stay at sea for long periods of time, but eventually they're going to have to be sustained and they have to go back into a port at some point. And so I just believe that the durability and all condition capability of land forces in the application of convergence, formations, new organizational formations, and then the adjustment of our force posture globally is a powerful path forward for us.
Your hard focus on land remains completely. I think even I'm beginning
I'm
to
here
get
to remind
convinced.
you of that.
I'm quite a cynic, but I'm beginning to fall in line out there. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Salma Baba, Professor for European Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. I'm convinced because my father was in the army, so I'm not getting away. He always said, unless we evacuate the planet, you need to hold the ground. And you can't hold the ground from the air. So, General Flynn, technology, theater, and tactics, the three things which really come together in the triad in fighting war. What we've seen with the Ukraine war is also the fact that it's a hybrid war. So how were you talking about force posture, looking into future, but I mean, the future is happening as we speak in terms of hybrid warfare. Yeah. How ready, and how much of it is already integrated into the hybrid warfare? Because much of it begins much earlier, before even the first signs of crisis in traditional sense make their appearance felt. You talked about information as well. The shift in information flows, how data is used, how social media is manipulated. It all begins right before, maybe a year in advance. How ready is, the traditional defense forces to take it on? Thank you.
Well, I think that I think exercising together, rehearsing together, planning together to share the insights, and then taking those and putting them into our operations day to day is how we're going to increase our readiness. And I think, again, I'll just use UWAS as an example of finding ways to create complexity in that exercise to do exactly as you were just expressing. That's really our challenge today, is to capitalize on what we're seeing with hybrid threats, the activities that are happening in the information space, and talking about that in educational forums, in land forces talks, and then actually putting those to practice in our exercises, so we rehearse some of the things that we're going to be confronted with, and doing that while we practice, so that the first time we see it is not when an adversary or an enemy is doing that to us. So I do think that the work that we're doing to increase the scale and the scope and the complexity of our exercises, which is a form of rehearsal, is really, that's the hard work ahead of us right now. And then capturing what's actually happening in these other real world operations, and making sure that we don't say, well, that will never happen to us. Well, we need to bake those in to the construct of the scenario and the exercise that we're training on, so we can create that realism and learn from it.
Thank you. Over to you, Pramit. Time is running short, and there is one question I would like somebody to ask. If you don't ask, I'll be forced to, which is on Quad. So, Pramit, over to you.
Well, I do have a question on the Quad, but the latest Quad summit had a clause on HADR cooperation. And when I've talked to both Indian and US officials, they said that's basically allows, for the first time, discrete military-to-military cooperation under the Quad banner. How much progress has that, how much has been done on that front? And just one question, Solomon Islands, South Pacific, we're seeing a really big Chinese push. How are you reading that?
I'll answer the second first, and then I'll come back to HADR. So I'll just, in more broader view, I would say the activities across Oceania by the CCP and the PRC, that they are, and I've expressed this, my characterization of what they've been doing is that it's this incremental and insidious path that they follow to, and expressed in their behaviors, to broker a sort of a corrosive and corruptive bargain, if you will, that undermines and threatens their sovereignty. And I think actually in Oceania, as I mentioned earlier before, I believe, in, at least in my engagements across a number of years out in those island nations, is their threat is really from natural disasters, typhoons, hurricanes, earthquakes, that just happened off Tonga and Fiji. And so their ability to rebound and have a infrastructure that is resilient so they can look after their sovereignty and look after their people and care for those that are injured and be able to regenerate, if you will, their country, their nation, is of great importance. I can't speak to on the HADR part and the Quad question. So 8 out of 10 natural disasters on the globe happen in this region of the world. The U.S. Army and the Theater Army has always played a central role in delivery of foundational capabilities, medical, engineering, civil affairs, communications, sustainment, logistics, mobility, counter-mobility, survivability, road development, reopening airports, runways, ports, through the Army Corps of Engineers. So I'm actually encouraged by recognition, particularly in this part of the world, that the Quad nations have agreed that we need to put mechanisms in place to be able to respond to those types of disasters in this part of the world. And I'm encouraged by that. I'm also encouraged by the fact that many of the materials that we use day to day in training, a Band-Aid is a Band-Aid is a Band-Aid. So to be able to provide those during exercises and then share that common user logistics, which is so important after a natural disaster, I think that that's a really important component of where the military can play a role. I mean, look at the way each of our armies responded during the pandemic to be able to help our people out. We do logistics, and we do logistics at scale. And I think that's another expression of the power of land power.
Thank you. Thanks, Pramit, for asking this question. I think we need a full conference on this islands, the Pacific Islands, but we can keep going layer by layer into it, but maybe some other time. Yeah.
So this is Manu Pabi from the Economic Times. So I'm very interested in your assessment of the PLA Army's capabilities. It's the first time in many years we've seen them in action on the Ladakh border. They moved troops and equipment very quickly to the border. How do you see them as a capable force, and what kind of vulnerabilities do you see them having also, which can be exploited?
Your question was about the Chinese army?
Yeah,
the PLA Army.
The capabilities of the Chinese army.
So their modernization efforts are really extraordinary in a wide range of capabilities. It's not just with land forces. It has to do with their strategic support forces, their rocket forces, command and control, etc. I'm actually going to try to answer your question and maybe answer Gautam's concern about land power. So I'll say it this way. The A2AD arsenal that the Chinese have designed is primarily designed to counter and defeat air and naval power. Secondarily, it's designed to deny, disrupt, and degrade effects in space and cyber. It is not designed to find, fix, and finish mobile networked, lethal, and meshed ground forces that are distributed and can present dilemmas from a wide range of positions in all directions and in all domains and on every layer and in every dimension, the information dimension, the physical dimension. And I think that this is a really important part of what land power provides as a counterweight to present multiple dilemmas to the modernization efforts that have been undertaken by the Communist Chinese Party and the PRC. And so I think that the Indian Army plays, as the U.S. Army does as well, plays a central role in presenting dilemmas to our adversaries that present these challenges to us. I mean, if you look at the use of rockets and missiles in Europe right now, and then I know this because of what we're designing with our short-range air defenses and our medium-range air defenses and our high-altitude air defenses. These are capabilities that I'm glad that we're moving out at the pace that we're moving out on these various systems. So that's just one of a number of things that I think are very helpful. That, again, mobile, distributed, networked, and lethal ground forces present a dilemma that they have not calculated into what they've designed.
We have very little time now that my big boss is glaring at me. Maybe one or two last
Did
questions.
that answer your question too?
Yeah, thank you, General Flynn. Vivek Mishra from ORF. My question is regarding the possibility of force restructuring in the Pacific from a land power perspective. We keep hearing about the possibility now and then. But for instance, you're present in Darwin, in Australia, in the Philippines. What are the chances of a restructuring of force posture given the changing nature of threats in the Pacific theater? Thank you.
Well, just yesterday. So there's a couple things. I'll talk, Army organizations. So the first multi-domain task force is in this region. We have added a theater fires element to my headquarters. The Security Forces Assistance Brigade. These are all, organizational designs. We're repositioning our watercraft across the region. Just yesterday in Alaska, my Secretary-in-Chief announced the formation of the 11th Airborne Division to restructure some of the organizations in Alaska, of which those organizations will do a lot of work, or at least it's my intention to have them do a lot of work with the Indian Army, because the conditions are very similar to those along the Himalayas. I think that these organizational adjustments and the calibrated force posture aspect of the comment I made earlier are important. I would tell you, in both countries that you mentioned there, we are building a training center in the Pacific. We're building it in, there's sort of two campuses, one in Hawaii in an archipelago jungle tropic environment across the 8 islands. And then we're building another one up in Alaska at high altitude, extreme cold weather, mountainous. And then we have a third capability that we're actually deploying into the region. Last year, we deployed it into Indonesia as part of Garuda Shield. And it's an exportable training center. The one thing that the U.S. Army does very, very well, and we've been doing it for years, is we have combat training centers for tactical readiness at the division, brigade, and below. In both countries that you mentioned, they're interested in building training centers to consolidate, right, at central locations to be able to bring echelons together and work on combined arms, air-ground integration with joint capabilities and with multinational partners. In fact, just this morning, I sent a note back to my leadership that the operation that we're going to do in Hawaii in October, November has 4 countries from the region that are committing a company or larger forces to that. And then there's 4 other countries that are sending observers. So in the matter of literally, 18 months, we've been able to generate that kind of interest. And I think the one in Alaska that we'll do in March, which will be at 20 degrees below zero, at altitude, I think we'll have even more countries involved in it. So I think that kind of training and the kind of advancement of exercising and rehearsing together is what we're going to continue to work on with the Indian forces.
Thank you. Last question, Sushant.
Thanks, Gautam. General Flynn, you said the lessons of the Ukraine conflict, it's probably too early, but we have the lessons of Afghanistan, 20 years, where we have, and earlier even Vietnam, where we have a highly organized modern army being defeated by, at least in the case of Afghanistan, and I'm use the word defeated advisedly, but that's the end result, by a ragtag force. So are we saying that military superiority of the conventional kind, which you are speaking of, can be very easily countered by a lightly armed guerrilla force willing to die in very large numbers? And if that is the case, how do you address that problem?
Well, I guess I would say, there's a lot of experts out there, and there's a lot of places that do modeling, and they put these scenarios together, and they do these correlation of forces and take, combat power on the ground, on the sea, on the air, and capabilities in space and cyber, and do a model and come out and say, here's the outcome. None of those models, there is no model that I'm aware of that can calculate accurately and measure accurately leadership and will. And I think that any army would have difficulty against a force that is willing and committed to defending their nation. I think that's playing out. To your question on does that mean that conventional forces are less important? I guess I'd respond by saying, I guess it depends. It depends on what you're trying to do with those conventional forces. If you're trying to avoid war and you're trying to deter and prevent war from happening, you're going to have a force that is credible enough and reliable enough to the adversary to make sure that they realize or they know that they will be defeated or they'll not be successful. They won't be able to achieve their objectives. And I think being able to maintain a force like that is important because there are going to be those out there that test that, as we just witnessed with Russia, because they did test it. Fortunately, in the case of the Ukraine, they were state-sponsored and backed by NATO, and I think that commitment added to their confidence, added to their will, and allowed them to perform the way they have performed. But I would also say, to a question earlier, that I think it's long from over. And I think, that those that thought this was going to be short, and decisive, I think it's going to be unpredictable and protracted, at least from what I can tell at this particular juncture.
Thank you. So that was supposed to be the last question, but as in war, things change. So we have one super last question here, right here.
Thank you. Thank you, Gautam. I'm Major Partha Roy. I'm from Ladakh Scouts, high altitude warfare, actually, you're mentioning right now. But now I'm with Lockheed Martin. So my question is, what are your expectations from the US defense industry? Being with Lockheed Martin, what are your expectations from the US defense industry in India?
I don't know if I have any expectations other than when we have capabilities that are interoperable, I'd like to think that industry is being responsive to the needs of those capabilities, and when they don't meet standards, that they're responsive enough to come back and help fix some of those challenges that they're not supposed to have. I also would say that, with the fielding of all equipment, all capabilities, there's always something that a soldier can break, or the environment and the conditions are more extreme than you had in a test. And so I think that there's this feedback loop that's really important between militaries and industry, and everybody just needs to maintain an open view on it and be responsive and agile enough to respond to those things, because I know there are capabilities that we brought into the Middle East. I can see capabilities that we have in Europe that are working, and I can also see that there are some capabilities that we want to modify and tweak a little bit based on the situation on the ground and the way that either we're responding or the way the adversaries are employing those capabilities.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think this was a very, very, very insightful discussion, including especially for me in terms of land, on the focus of land. And I think, Manu, you got your headline. So thank you very much. There is a small token of appreciation from us.